Well, welcome back. Thank you for tuning in again. It is Tuesday, the 21st of April. Now, if you've tuned in for a bit of a global roundup, that's going to be next. And I've got some interesting data from the Office for National Statistics from the UK, but that's going to be in the next video. In this video, I want to talk about two things. Now, the first is the likelihood of people of different ethnicities and different colours, different skin colours, contracting the disease COVID-19 with greater or lesser degrees of severity, and indeed the probability that people from different ethnicities will die from the disease. Now, this is a remarkably serious topic. Now, if you don't want to watch this video, I'll just give you the bottom line on it now. The bottom line is that in the UK and in the US, more darker skinned people than lighter skinned people are dying. And we'll look at reasons for this. Some are sociological, cultural, economic. But I believe by far the most important reasons are biological. And we'll look at biological differences in the way that dark skin produces vitamin D, amongst other things. So that's one thing for this video. And the next thing we want to look at on this video is the difference between male and female. Now, if you're a woman watching this, you are much less likely to get severe disease and to die than a male equivalent of you watching this. And we want to look at why that is. And again, I'll give you the bottom line now. The bottom line is we don't know, but there are some interesting theories starting to emerge. But of course, plenty of detail if you want to stick around. But if you want to tune back in for the news, that's fine. I won't be remotely offended. That's fine. Now, this is from a paper, which I'll give you the link to. I think it was in the BMJ, British Medical Journal. So quite a prestigious publication. Now, I'll get the link. You can click straight onto it from the description below. Quite a few people have asked me about these links, and they're in the description. So just below the video, there's a description of the video, and that's where I put these links. And you can click straight through to the website from those links. Now, this is the title of the paper just published. Is ethnicity linked to incidence or outcome of COVID-19? Now, let's look at this first of all. The incidence is the number of cases. So the incidence is actually the number of new cases. The prevalence is the number of cases altogether at any one time. So the incidence is the number of new cases. Now, is it linked to the number of new cases? Now, the first answer to that question is I think not. But I do believe it's linked to the number of new cases which are symptomatic and severe. So we know that quite a few people get this infection, maybe 50-60% in young people anyway can get this infection and not show symptoms. And we have looked at that. We looked at data from the Theodore Roosevelt, and we also looked at data from the Dutch blood transfusion study. And we also looked at data from the study from, what's that university called in California? I can't remember now. Anyway, the university in California that gave some data, but it seems to be questionable. They thought the incidence was many times what it was, and that looks like it is now being questioned by a lot of people. So if a major university has put out erroneous data, I will be very disappointed in the current climate. Now, so anyway, back to the British Medical Journal. Now, this is not a research paper; it's a letter for discussion, really, more than anything else. So is ethnicity linked to the incidence? So the amount of people that catch it, I don't think so. But the amount of people that become symptomatic, yes, I think it probably is. Now, earlier on in China, the data was collected on ethnically homogeneous cohorts. Now, this is typical research speak. So ethnically means to do with the race, the racial origins, racial backgrounds. Homogeneous means they're all the same, and cohorts means the group. In other words, the people they looked at were all Chinese. That's basically what this means. They were all Chinese. So there weren't some people from Pakistan, there weren't some people from China. They were mostly just Chinese. So that's ethnically homogeneous. And they came up with factors that we know. Increasing age increases the risk of severe disease. Male sex increases the risk of severe disease. These things that we know. Now, comorbidities, we also know: cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes. So again, people with these comorbidities are more likely to get severe disease. Not necessarily more likely to catch the virus, but more likely to get severe disease. So that's what we had so far. But then the ethnic minority population in the UK at the moment, well, in the 2011 census, which was the last census, it was 13%. Now I think it's probably about 14%. We've had quite a lot of immigration lately, but a fair bit of that's from Europe. So Poles, for example, which are basically the same, well, they are the same colour as me. So I'm saying around about 14%. That'll be right to within a percent either way. It's that kind of figures for the ethnic minority population of the UK. Now, what were the warning signs that made us think there might be a problem here? Well, one of the first ones that many people noticed was the first 10 doctors in the UK to die from COVID-19 were from ethnic minorities. And I must say I noticed this straight away, as did many others, of course. So we remember each one as a lost individual who we grieve for, and we send our condolences to each one. They're not statistics, but nevertheless they accumulated to 10 were from ethnic minorities. And also from the National Intensive Care audit, we found that a third of COVID-19 patients admitted to critical care units are from ethnic minority backgrounds. So a third, of course, is 33%. So we've got 33% of people being admitted to intensive care units are from ethnic minorities, but the overall population is 14, so we see they're overrepresented. Now, having said that, a lot of the early cases in London, in the UK, were in London, which has a higher proportion of ethnic minorities, and we have looked at this in detail in past videos. But let's just notice now that 2,249 patients admitted to 201 critical care units in England and Wales. And of those, 64.8% were white. These had darker coloured skin, all of them. There might have been some Chinese that weren't very much darker coloured, but basically African origin, Afro-Caribbean, Asian, they all have darker coloured skin. And we can see that they're overrepresented. So we would expect all of this lot collectively, all of these three groups, Asian, black and others or mixed, if it was in proportion to the general population, we would expect this to add up to 14%. But clearly we can see it adds up to 28, 30 odd percent. We can see it adds up to a lot more. So there's a clear discrepancy here. In fact, we know it's about a third, don't we? So there's a clear discrepancy here, and the ethnic minorities are overrepresented. Now, the mean age was 61 years of these people admitted to the coronary care units. So not too old, really. 61's not, well, not 61, it's 60.1. 60.1 years. So this preponderance of people from ethnic minorities. So NHS and Public Health England need to review why ethnic minority populations seem to be disproportionately affected with more severe disease. So this is like a declared aim now. They want to review the evidence and work out why this is. So this is on the official agenda now of Public Health England. And the authors of the paper say we need detailed national data reported by ethnic group. So when data is collected around the world, yes, we need to know the sex. Yes, we need to know the comorbidities, and yes, we need to know the ethnic group that they are from. This is essential biological information, just as important as collecting information on whether they have heart disease or whatever it is. So this needs to be collected in detail everywhere statistics are collected. I would propose, and this group is certainly proposing this for the UK. Now, the other part of the background here is from the United States. Now, the Washington Post did a survey on this, and they found out that counties with black majorities had 3 times the rate of COVID-19 cases. And these are severe cases. As we say, the number of people that are simply recognised, we don't know. The number of people that are simply infected, we don't know, because we haven't got full antibody studies. But of the people that were recognised as being sick, again, we see African Americans disproportionately represented. Among 6 times the rates of death compared with counties where white residents are in the majority. So we see this data is indicating strongly that African Americans are disproportionately dying compared to white Americans. Now, as I understand it in the States, some people are collecting this data and some people aren't. So to me, it's clear that the American authorities in every state need to start collecting data based on ethnicity so we can get a much better handle on what's going on here. Are these people African American? To what degree are they African American? This is important at the moment information. Now, the potential reasons were speculated about by this paper, the BMJ paper. So, potential reasons. So the dimension, was it socio-economic? That's possible. Was it cultural? So socio-economic means economic level and things like that. But given that the first 10 people that died in hospital were all doctors, well, we can't say that they were from lower socio-economic groups. So personally, I'm always reluctant to resort to sociological, psychological explanations until biological explanations have been excluded. In fact, in psychiatry, the worst mistake you can make in psychiatry is to assume that a particular symptom or sign is psychiatric or psychological in origin before you've excluded the medical biological possibilities. That of course is why that's why psychiatrists are all medical doctors, of course. This is a well-recognised phenomenon. So let's not jump to that. Now, cultural behaviour is a real possibility. For example, Islamic women often wear headscarves, whereas non-Islamic women don't. And Islamic women are often, not always of course, but more often from ethnic minorities. So there could be cultural factors there. And of course, there's cultural factors in diet, in behaviour. A lot of cultural factors that are related to culture and religion. Lifestyle is another one. Are there dietary changes? Is there more smoking? Is there more alcohol consumption? Is there less exercise taken? But of course, genetics is also a big factor as well. So let's carry on with this. So pathophysiology, this is this group speculating again about the causes. Pathological differences or susceptibility in response to infection. So pathophysiological, that's the way that disease interacts with the body. So in different ethnicities, in different races, are there differences in susceptibility and response to infection? That's a very good question. Now, in ethnic minorities in the UK and indeed in the States, I think, there's increased risk of admission for acute respiratory infections. Interesting. So this is already a known problem with acute respiratory infections, where there's a disproportionate number of people from ethnic minorities admitted to hospital for acute respiratory tract infections, which of course COVID-19 essentially is. The authors suggest a prevalence of vitamin D deficiency. So the authors acknowledge that vitamin D deficiency is more common in ethnic groups because the skin is darker and produces vitamin C more slowly, especially in northern latitudes. So if you live in Scotland or Chicago and you have dark coloured skin, you're going to make much less vitamin D in the limited sunshine that's available to you for much of the year. Now, vaccination policies in country of birth was proposed as possible, and the immune effects from vaccination. But having said that, I don't know what the percentage is, but I think the majority of people from ethnic racial backgrounds now in the UK are born in the UK. So I don't really think that's a factor. Increased inflammatory burden. Well, inflammation just comes from disease and lifestyle. So that's put forward as a possibility. Now, higher prevalence of cardiovascular risk factors such as insulin resistance and obesity. So there's more insulin resistance, there's more type 2 diabetes, and there's more obesity in ethnic minorities in the UK compared to the white population. Especially the Asian population has very high prevalence of diabetes. Now, we could talk about the reasons for that, but I'm not going to talk about that now. But there are a lot of environmental reasons for that, but there are also genetic reasons for that. It's a complicated topic. In my view, the genetic factors are more important. Ethnic differences in expression of antigen converting enzyme 2 receptors. Right, okay. So what this is saying is that we've done this before, but if this is the surface of the cell in the it's not a very good shape. The cells in the respiratory mucosa are more kind of that shape, actually. The kind of column-shaped cells. And these often have the cilia projecting from the top, the cilia hairs. And if we look at this surface in greater magnification, in fact in huge magnification, so if we take this surface in huge magnification like this, then what we have on the surface of these cells are receptors, like this, receptor sites, receptor proteins. And these are called the ACE2 receptors. The ACE2 receptor. Now, the way the virus gets into the body is these protein spikes that are on the surface of the virus. These are the protein spikes on the surface of the virus. They fit into that ACE2 receptor site. The virus isn't drawn to scale. On the scale of this cell, the virus will be about that size. Oh no, that's the... Yeah, no, even on that size, the virus will be about that scale, probably. Even compared to the... No, anyway, never mind. It's smaller, it's not drawn to scale. What I'm trying to say is, let's get this right. Compared to this cell, right, because I was on a different scale here. Compared to this cell, which is a single cell, so that would be several, that would probably be about 5-6 micrometers in size. The virus would kind of be about that size on this scale, with its spikes like that. Yeah, right. Now, the point I'm trying to make is the ACE2 receptor is where this fits in. And it's only when the virus absorbs onto this ACE2 receptor that the virus can combine with the surface membrane here and let its genetic material into the cell, the RNA of the virus into the cell. So the virus only gets in through these ACE2 receptors, only in through the ACE2 receptors. And the idea here is that some races may produce more ACE2 receptors than others. Different ethnic differences in the expression of angiotensin converting enzyme ACE2 receptors. Is that true or not? I don't know. I don't know that anyone knows if that's true or not. People have speculated about it, but it may be true. And if it is, it could be a factor, but we don't know if it's true. So really, these are the authors, as far as I can see, thinking out loud. Now, often live in extended cohabiting families. So like Italy, there can be several generations living in the same household. So that could be a factor. And that can make social distancing more challenging, particularly social distancing between the generations. But again, it's not always true by any means. So anyway, they're the causes that the authors were speculating about. So what next? The authors are saying, well, we need to collect robust data and analyse that of routinely collected prospective data. So what they're saying is, from now on, prospectively, we have to collect all the data that we normally collect. We have to add ethnicity to that, and we have to collect all this data and then analyse the data using robust research methodology. And let's see if this is a real effect, or let's see if it's an artifact. I think it's a real effect because it's been reported in several countries now. That's why I think it's a real effect. Now, we know age. We also need to collect data on age, as we know. We need to collect data on sex, as we know. Underlying morbidities, as we know. Place of residence could turn out to be relevant. We can collect this data and see if there's any geographical distribution patterns as well. Area clustering, we collect data on socio-demographic factors. So occupation, where they live, things like that can be collected. And laboratory findings need to be measured and collected as well. So there's a lot of data to collect here to get a full picture of this. Another factor could be the burden of undiagnosed disease, particularly diabetes and hypertension, which are often underdiagnosed. And the researchers say this will need to be mixed methods research because of the complex interaction. So what they're saying is you'd need some quantitative research, you'd need some qualitative research to try and find out what's going on here. and efforts must be made to coordinate to collect an international data set. So this is not just this country, this needs to be done internationally, and it needs to be done with some urgency. Now, in the meantime, all the usual advice applies, of course. Hygiene, social distancing, all the advice we already know has to apply, and arguably apply even more so to people from ethnic backgrounds. Maintain healthy lifestyles to optimise cardio, metabolic and mental health. So we have to optimise health in everyone at the moment. So cardio's to do with the heart, metabolic's to do with metabolism, things like diabetes. So basically we want to be taking exercise. We don't want to be eating lots of sugars. We want to have a healthy, varied diet, and we want to consider mental health. And finally, the authors of this paper did say it's important information must be communicated in a way that's accessible and culturally appropriate. So pretty good advice there, and some pretty interesting areas for future research. Now let me give you my perspective on this. Now here's one of my world-class graphics generated by Liz Gould for me, so thank you again, Liz. Lots of people like your graphics. Now here we have the sun in the middle and all the sunbeams shining out. So the question is, are you getting enough vitamin D? Studies have found many people in northern latitudes are deficient in vitamin D. This deficiency is even more pronounced for people in northern latitudes with darker skin pigmentation. There is some vitamin D in the food. So for example, oily fish, egg yolks, liver, butter and mushrooms. But most of the vitamin D that we produce comes from the sun. A study found using supplements to correct very low vitamin D levels led to 70% less viral and bacterial infections. Now, I'll just mention that study now. What that study was, it was a meta-analysis. I think it was in BMJ again, actually. We did look at it last week. And what it found was that the people that were very deficient in vitamin D were getting so there were some people found to be very deficient in vitamin D, and if you gave them supplements they got 70% less infections. So this is saying that people that are low in vitamin D do get more infections, and of course we know darker coloured skin gives rise to more infections. So it's remarkably interesting. So what Liz has drawn here is we have a complete gradation. So what's the advantage in being very dark coloured? What's the advantage in being very light coloured? Well, the original humans would have been black. They came from Africa. Or if you want to put it another way, Adam and Eve would have been black, in my view. I may get contradictory views, but that's my view. Now, darker skin protects from sunburn, but produces vitamin D more slowly. So the big advantage of being black is you don't get sunburned. And I know this. I've been out with Indian friends all day and I get sunburnt and they don't. So as people migrated north, the idea is there is a selective advantage to them becoming lighter. So lighter skin burns easily, but produces vitamin D more quickly. So there's a whole gradation. So if you're very white, you'll produce vitamin D very quickly. If you're very black, you'll produce vitamin D more slowly. If you're in the middle, you're going to be halfway between those two. So there's a complete gradation in the speed at which the skin will produce vitamin D in darker coloured people. And also, in regards to another excellent graphic, thank you, Liz. Another point, vitamin D plays a role in protecting the lungs from inflammation. So vitamin D reduces the likelihood of getting viral or bacterial respiratory infections if you're deficient in it, we know that. It also helps the body's immune system from overreacting. So people who are deficient in vitamin D are more likely to get this cytokine storm that people talk about. And it's this cytokine storm that causes acute respiratory distress syndrome, where the alveoli, these air sacs, so here's the lungs here, and here's a blow up, and we see here that there's inflammatory fluid collecting in the alveoli, and of course that prevents the gaseous exchange. So I can put links to this in the description, and also freeze frame it and examine it. And we also looked in the previous study that there's vitamin D receptors in these cells, and these are all immune cells. So lymphocytes particularly protect us from viral infections, monocytes protect us from all sorts of infections, neutrophils particularly protect us from bacterial infections, and then dendritic cells recognize the presence of foreign material in the body. So some fairly convincing arguments there in my view. So the bottom line here is, the Public Health England already advise taking vitamin D supplements, but to a low level. And they do suggest that people with darker coloured skin should take vitamin D supplements all the way around. So I'm happy to recommend Public Health England guidelines to everyone, and I'll put a link to that in the video notes as well. So I think everyone should be doing that. But the question is, should some people be taking much higher doses of vitamin D? Now, this is not for me to prescribe. We need national guidelines on this. Because if it is something as simple as vitamin D that means people from ethnic minorities are dying more, then that is a very simple thing to correct. So if you're watching this video, get onto your local politicians and say, oi, have a word with Public Health England and let's get something definitive on this. That they need to make a ruling on this and give specific guidance on this, which at the moment is not there. Personally, as I've said before, I'm taking extra vitamin D every day. Because I've been in an English winter, you just don't make it. Even if I am white, still don't make enough. Now, the last thing I want to do today is looking at sex. So we know, in fact, let's just look at the graph first on this. Just a bit of the evidence here. So this is from the Office for National Statistics. The number of deaths involving COVID-19 was lower in females than males in all age groups. And this is the latest data up to the 10th of April. So males are in blue, females are in yellow. So in the younger age, so let's move up a bit. The younger age group, thankfully no deaths down here, but the younger age group, still more men than women dying. Thankfully an overall small amount. The 45 to 64, amazing, there was no women at all in that group. Oh, wow, it was only men. The 65 to 74, well, it looks about twice as many men, doesn't it? And again in the 75 to 84, way more many men. And in the older group, again, more men. So I think that data there is pretty hard to argue with, really. And this is data from all of England and Wales up to the 10th of April. So I don't think there's any question. And this is consistent with findings from all around the world. So sex is a factor. Now, the question is why? Is it lifestyle related? Do the different male and female live differently? Well, the Office for National Statistics, again, very helpful. At the moment in the UK, the last time they checked, was the 16.5% of men in the UK still smoke. Years ago, it would have been way, way more. Women, it's only 13% smoke. So there's a bit of a difference there. More men than women still smoking. And the key thing about smoking is, of course, it causes heart disease, ischemic heart disease and lung disease, which we know are relevant comorbidities. And in China, it's apparently very uncommon for women to smoke, whereas men smoke a lot in China. So it could well be a factor there in the smoking. I think I'm pretty safe in advising you to stop smoking to improve your health. I'm quite happy to recommend that. Right, obesity and overweight. Well, again, there's a bit of a difference. Now, isn't it a stark comment on our society that 67.2% of men in this country are overweight or obese? Dear me. But women, it's 61%. So again, we see there's more obese and overweight men than women. So, and we know obesity is probably a risk factor for severe disease and death. So possible. Men are still drinking more, and alcohol is associated with all sorts of diseases, cancers, peripheral neuropathy, dementia, All sorts of diseases are associated with alcohol. And there's some evidence that alcohol reduces the efficiency of the immune system as well, so that's a possibility. And then immunological, hormonal and genetic factors. Now, many immune function genes apparently are on the X chromosome. Now, I didn't know this. But the background here is we all have 46 chromosomes, as you probably know. We all have 46 chromosomes. And men have 44 so-called autosomes, plus an X and a Y chromosome. And women have 44 autosomes, plus an X and an X chromosome. Now, the thing is, relatively speaking, the X chromosome is big. And the Y chromosome is positively tiny. The Y chromosome is the smallest of the chromosome. So that means that's what men have got there. So they've got this big X chromosome with some genes on it. And they've got the Y chromosome, they've got the X chromosome and the Y chromosome with some genes on it there. But it means the men have only got one copy of these genes. Whereas women that are X and X, then they're going to have two X chromosomes like this. They've got two X chromosomes. So that means they've got these genes there and there as well. So they've got two copies of all these genes. So-called alleles in different parts of the chromosome. So is that a factor, this single X chromosome phenomena? Well, if there's some genes that are responsible for making immune function there, and that gene is deficient in a man, then they have no equivalent space on there, so they can't make it. Whereas women, if they have a defective gene there, then they've got a spare one there that can probably still have an immunological function. For example, this is what happens in haemophilia, where men suffer from haemophilia because the gene to produce the clotting factor is on the X chromosome. So that's possible, but I don't know of any firm data for that, but it is possible. So the X chromosome, men only have one, that's possible. Now, the other possibility is estrogen may bind to immune cells and activate immunological molecules. So estrogen could be a factor, but of course after the menopause, women basically stop producing estrogen. So after the menopause, estrogen levels plummet in women, but we know that in older women who don't have the estrogen, they still have much lower death rates. So I don't buy that one. In younger women, it could be the estrogen, but in older women, I don't think it's the estrogen. So to conclude, the answer is I don't know why more men than women are dying, but I do know it's true. And to tell you the truth, I don't think that anyone knows. So a couple of important things on that video: ethnicity and risk factors, and sex and risk factors.